All right, thank you everyone for coming. This is our second talk of a 4-part talk series. Today the talk is on the prepared environment. The first talk was on the 4 planes of development. So that video is actually available. Chris already emailed it out. So if you haven't seen that, please watch that because that's kind of a foundational talk for the other 3 talks that are going to be given. So today is about the prepared environment. The next talk will be next week, and that is the one that's about discipline and the development of the will, right? And then the final talk will be on the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which is the Montessori version of CCD, like the faith formation for the kids. So please welcome Maggie Radzig for our second talk.
So like Mara said, the first talk is already out there, so you can review. I did put the chart up of the 4 planes of human development that we talked about. Dr. Montessori's, this is the framework for everything else that we'll talk about with her discovery of the nature of the child, that the human person goes through 4 very distinct phases of development from conception to maturity, which is somewhere between 24 and 25. And we talked about that. The primary characteristic of the child before the age of 7, somewhere between 6 and 7, the brain-mind changes. But from 0 to 6, we have the capacity of what she termed the absorbent mind, that everything that's in the child's environment becomes them. She said they incarnate every experience they have. Everything they see, every attitude of every adult, every experience. They don't have the capacity of memory yet because they haven't built the brain. Remember, 90% of brain development happens before the age of 3, happens from birth to the age of 3. So they're building the fabric of the brain, and this is what she termed the absorbent mind. Then somewhere between 6 and 7, the reasoning, creative, imaginative mind takes over, and that's the type of brain mind we have for the rest of our life. So this period of the absorbent mind is the most important period in our development. We also talked about the psychic characteristics of work, that from the very beginning, the human person wants to be purposefully active. The child wants to be moving and doing things. Work begot concentration that we saw from the very beginning. If an adult is trained not to interrupt a child, concentration, long spans of concentration are natural to the child from the moment of birth. But as adults, we don't know that, and we continually break their concentration. Then we also saw this desire for independence, to do it myself. And that was what the children said in her first environment. One little 4-year-old boy said, "Help me to do it myself. Don't do it for me." And then she saw this innate desire in the human person to do for ourselves, so that then we can be interdependent until we're independent. So then today we just want to look briefly at the sensitive periods and the human tendencies, and then her idea of the need for a prepared adult and a prepared environment. So the human tendencies, Dr. Montessori saw that every animal, every insect that had been created prepared an environment for their young. She said, what is a beehive or a nest or a fox's den if not a prepared environment for their young to be safe and grow up in? And then she started questioning, what is the optimum environment for a human child? What type of environment will release the potential within the child? And that's really going to be the focus of our talk. But she noticed that humans did not have that hardwired instinct that animals have. We can adapt, we can overcome, different types of environments. She said, rather, I see that humans have tendencies towards certain behavior. And she said this wasn't, the be-all and end-all list, but these were the basic human tendencies, that we have a desire for order, for things to be ordered, we don't like to live in an atmosphere of chaos. We want to know what comes next. Nature is ordered, the seasons and the way things happen. We have a desire to explore. And these human tendencies, she said, she believed were there from the moment of conception and throughout our lives, but they express themselves differently at different times. So the exploration of a 2-year-old is very different from the exploration of an 18-year-old. But we're always exploring our environment. We're always wanting to discover. Part of exploration is to be able to orient ourselves to different places and times. And when you've traveled, you've gone somewhere new, and you get to the new town, or you're looking around to orient yourself, to say, okay, when we came out of the hotel, this was down that way, we're constantly. And babies do this. We'll see them orienting themselves. The minute you take them to a new environment, they're looking behind, they're looking forward, they have this innate tendency to orient themselves. Communication, repetition, very important human tendency, especially for the young child. She said the human person likes to repeat, things that we enjoy. We don't just go swimming one time and say, okay, I've done that, it was great, and never do it again. We repeat things we like. For the young child, their need of repetition is part of the integration of their personality, the building of their brain. Montessori didn't have the use of technology. This was just, she discovered all of this through observation. Now we know every time a young child repeats an action, it's those dendrites reaching out to make a connection, and then finally the synaptic connection is made. And if our skulls were translucent and we could see it, this Dr. Bruce Perry says that, we would never interrupt a baby or a toddler repeating an action, because for every child it's different. Some children might repeat 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, 5 times. It's different for every person, but during that repetition, the synaptic connections are made. So it's simple things, the sitting in the chair, sitting in the high chair and dropping the Cheerio and watching it over and over and over. An adult can misunderstand that and think, you're just trying to get under my skin, but if you observe the child, they're not. They're watching each time, all of that observation, how long it takes to drop to the floor. As parents, you see this all the time, a light switch, mommy's earring, taking it out, putting it in, taking it out, putting it in. An 8-year-old, a 9-year-old doesn't do that. That need is gone, but there's an intense need for repetition, especially in the first 3 to 4 years of life. Work, we already talked about, and she used to write work in capital letters. It's so natural to man that we want to be purposefully active. Manipulation, by that she meant work with the hand to build up and change the environment. Socialization, we want to be around others. Abstraction, we have the power of abstract thought that begins somewhere around 6 or 7. And then the desire for self-perfection and exactness. And this is a really important one to know as teachers and adults. The child wants to do things well. They don't have the physical coordination in the beginning, which is another reason they're repeating. I just came across in my notes some of the science that came out in the past 20 years, that every single movement a baby makes, and Montessori noticed these same movements were done all over the globe, no matter if it was a tribe in, the Amazon or New York City, the babies made the same actions. Those, when they straighten their arms like that, or their legs, or these funny actions that we'll laugh at. Now, brain research shows that exact activity is preparing the muscles for the next activity. These aren't random, they look kind of crazy to us, because we don't see the purpose of it, but every single movement has a purpose. They're trying to perfect themselves so that they can go on to the next stage of development. So now we're going to look at, and we also talked about what Dr. Montessori called the 2 poles of humanity. That she said, I believe we are divided into the pole of childhood and the pole of adulthood, and that we're supposed to be exerting upon one another a reciprocal influence, that the child is sent to form the adult as much as the adult is intended to form the child. One of the questions she would say, there's plenty of books and plenty of articles out there titled How to Get Your Child to whatever. Sleep through the night, eat their vegetables, obey, all that. The question rather, she said, should be, what does this child need and how can I meet that need? It's a step away from controlling their development, which God didn't intend us to do. We don't need to develop our children. God has a guide within the child. Dr. Montessori called it the inner guide, the Spirit of God working within the child. He put those laws within the child for development. We don't need to do that. We don't develop the child. We prepare an environment and we work with them. She said rather it's an atmosphere of cooperation. The adult is always the adult, but they need us to cooperate with them in their development. So she said, what is this prepared environment? And the one who, she would draw a triangle and say it's always a triune relationship, the adult, the child, and the environment, meaning the home, wherever we live. And that the adult is the one who prepares the environment for the child and connects the child to the environment. So we want to look at the home environment and then the environment of the Montessori classroom. She said adults are always preparing an environment for a child. It's just whether or not this preparation is based on knowledge of child development or not. So a man and a woman are always preparing their seed, their womb, for the future child. But is this, preparation based on proper nutrition and spiritual development, or not? So we want, of course, to be preparing the environment for the child based on knowledge of child development. So she said, of course, the first environment for us, when God creates us, is the womb of our mother. And she called that the last frontier. She said, when we finally understand all that the child is absorbing in those 9 months, she said, we'll just be astounded. I love that story I heard a few years ago of a conductor, I wish I could remember his name, who at the last minute, I think a conductor had gotten sick, and he was asked to step in and conduct the symphony. And he had never heard of the piece that he was supposed to be conducting, and he, kind of panicked. And then when he got up there, he just did it with ease. And afterwards, he called his mother and he said, I'm just amazed. I don't know what happened. And she said, when you were in utero, I practiced that piece on my cello, leaning against my tummy, over and over and over and over. And this was in a book about the spiritual life of composers. And I thought, wow, how incredible. And now there's so much research going on in places about what the child is learning in utero. Then, moments after birth, the first environment for the child is the mother's body. There's a new connection now to nursing, if nursing is possible, or to intimate feeding. And she said in those first 8 weeks of life, she called that the first psychological leg. She identified 2 psychological legs in the development of the 0 to 3-year-old. She said the first 8 weeks of life, the child absorbs trust in the world or not. My cries are answered, there's somebody there for me or not, and I have to turn inwards and satisfy my own need. Of course, the ideal is for there to be mother and father, caregivers that are loving the child and responding to them at all times. So it's really for 8 weeks, it's me and mommy. And then she said at 8 weeks, at that young age, if the first psychological leg has been established, the child begins to look outward. They start detaching from the breast, they start pulling away from the bottle if they're being bottle fed, and they start looking outward. And she said that's a sign to us that they've got it now. They are, I see several moms nodding their heads, yes, this happens. They are ready now to see what else is out there besides mom. So she said just that gesture of now when the baby's sitting on our lap, we face them outwards. Mom is still there, but now they're looking and they're discovering siblings. They're, of course, dad has been there all along too, but that intimate relationship between the mother and the child in those first 8 weeks is so important. Now, she said, the second psychological leg begins to be established, and this is where the external environment really has a huge impact on the child. The second psychological leg is trust in self. I attempt to do things. I'm not corrected when I'm attempting to do something. I try over and over, and finally I'm able to do it. I'm trying to push up. Again, I love all of the, I won't give all of the biological background. I love all that, though, that everything the human person is doing is preparing them physically and spiritually for the next step. So they're trying, they're not interrupted, and they develop by 2.5 this basic trust in self. I can do things, and I'm okay if I make mistakes. I learn from my mistakes. So the prepared environment for the home is Montessori believed from the beginning that the child should have their own space in the home, and that they should be placed on if able, if the home has a separate bedroom, that the child would have their own bedroom very near to the parent's bedroom with a floor bed, not a crib. She saw that a crib was something made for an adult. It certainly didn't benefit the child. When they look out, they see everything through segmented bars. They can't get in it on their own. They can't get out of it on their own. So a low floor bed. And she said in preparing the child's room, the mother and father should crawl around, and see what's interesting here. Artwork should be placed low. There should be one low shelf that has 3 baskets or boxes of manipulatives in them, only 3 toys at a time, she said, because more, then we're destroying their concentration. What they're going to be doing most is moving. They don't need a lot of objects in the first years of life. So a low shelf, a few books, a couple of objects, a nursing chair. That she said that nursing, that feeding relationship is the first template for future intimate relationships. Can we sit in front of a computer and nurse? Yes. But what are we modeling for the child? That my body is doing one thing and my mind is doing another. We don't want to be modeling that for our children. Does it have to happen sometimes? Maybe. But especially in those first 8 weeks, we're modeling when we give our bodies, we're giving our whole selves to the child. And the child is repairing the mother too. It's that beautiful relationship. So in their bedroom, this low bed and a shelf, a nursing chair, and then the changing table she believes should be in the bathroom, if there's a changing table at all. But she identified, she said, we don't go to the bathroom in our bedroom. We go to the bathroom in the bathroom. So from the very beginning, I've known lots of families to just not even have a changing table anymore. They have a mat near the toilet, and the child is seeing from the very beginning, we dump this in the toilet. And then this gesture too, I thought this was beautiful. She said, you don't even use a changing table for very long, because once the child can stand, she saw it as being disrespectful to the child to lay them back down to change their diaper. She said they finally arrived at that moment of standing, and now they can use their hands. To lay them back down, she said, is really disrespectful. We cooperate with them standing, and she said they should be standing on the edge of the toilet. And then, from all these Montessori families, they get toilet trained very quickly. And that's a whole nother talk, giving the first experience when the child is 6 months old on the toilet without the diaper, long before the age of 2, we're giving them that experience. Because at 2, independence starts peaking and they want to do things themselves. So if mom and dad want them to use the toilet, very often they'll say no. Then we have this struggle. So the rest of the home environment, that's basically the child's room. Last week I mentioned the book From the Start, Montessori in the Home from 0 to 3. That book gives lots and lots of specifics, the mobiles that you would use, the different manipulatives that you would use. But she said every room in the house should have a place for the child. They shouldn't be a guest in their own homes. They're a member of the family. If there are things that are off limits, the office or whatever, okay, a baby gate goes up and nope, that's where mom and dad do work that it's not safe for you to be in there. That's where the computer is, or whatever the mother and father decide. But wherever the family is, there should be a place for the child. A low shelf in the living room with a few manipulatives, a few books. And by few, I mean a few in the beginning. Usually the conflicts come because of the stuff. The child, it's very, very hard to keep the stuff at bay in the United States. Children are inundated. I mean, even the best intentioned parents, all of a sudden, a year and a half, you've received so many gifts, so much stuff, and then it's very difficult to keep order if we don't have a fewer amount of things. To get the child in that habit from the beginning, as they grow, it's much easier for them to keep order. So now I want to switch to the sensitive periods, which we didn't talk about last time, very briefly. Again, this could be a week-long study, everything she discovered about the sensitive periods. You can find more information in The Absorbent Mind and The Discovery of the Child if you want to look in depth. But she saw these sensitive periods that direct the absorbent mind to certain aspects in their environment that enable them with ease to learn a particular skill or obtain a certain power. For example, language. Order, movement, and language, those sensitive periods all begin at birth. And now we know language long before birth. We know the newly fertilized human person moves differently in utero from soprano voices to bass voices. Fascinating. And as the baby grows, the upper part of the baby is stimulated by more female voices, soprano voices, and the trunk, lower part of the baby is stimulated by male voices. So language from the very beginning, the child is absorbing. About 4 or 5 months, they start staring at the adult's mouth as we're talking. They're looking at those words. And as soon as they can start grasping, they start grasping our mouth. They want those words. Language is extremely important. It's what enables us to communicate how we feel about one another and our experiences in the environment. Movement, another extremely important sensitive period. Now we know the more a child moves in their first 3 years of life, the heavier and the stronger their brain. Montessori said, "The man who does not move is injured in his very soul and becomes an outcast of life." How could it have been thought beneficial for the adult to suppress a child's movement when the very difference between an animal and a vegetable is that animals move? The very root of the word is anima, to animate. We see it's natural to all children to move almost continually, even when they're sleeping. Their fingers are feeling the blanket, their eyelids, they're almost never completely still, like an adult will be. I have a friend whose child is 4, and when this child was 2, she was, peaking for movement. And I said, "Michelle, do you have any," I was about to give a talk. I said, "Do you have any words of wisdom for these?" It was a group of brand new parents. And she said, "Yes, just when you think you've given enough movement, give more." And so many of the sleep problems come from the child not expending enough energy. When we go for a walk, we have a goal in mind. We're going to walk for a certain amount of time. We're going to walk straight there. The child, once they can walk, just wants to walk. They don't know where they're going. They don't care how long it takes to get there. They can walk now. They've been preparing their whole bodies for this. She said at 1.5, the child can walk well over a mile if the adult will just go at their pace, without any goal in mind, just having the joy of walking, trying to conquer those little hills, and you know how cute they are. They're trying to, they're trying to, navigate all this. They need all of that practice. So movement, extremely important. Order, she said, besides being a human tendency, it is an intellectual need for the young child to be able to order all of the impressions that they're taking in. From the moment of birth, the human person is taking in millions of impressions every day. The colors, the shapes, the movement of the leaves, the different voices, the different sounds of the machinery. It's why infants sleep so much. They take in so much, they can't take in anymore. They have to sleep and process it. By order in their daily, the structure of daily life and order in the physical environment, things not changing, they are able to focus, they are able to make mental order. So she said, to the adult, this need for order can look like a neuroses. And I can't tell you how many parents, especially dads, will come up and say, "I don't know what's wrong with my son, but I bought him these little cars. He's not using them as cars, he's lining them up. All he wants to do is line up these cars." Every child does that. They'll line up the Cheerios. It's that order, making order of things that they can move and manipulate. It passes, and by 4.5, 5, they don't have that need for order anymore. Especially when the reasoning mind takes over. If they've had that order, they really don't need it. And this is when their room becomes extremely messy. They've got the intellectual order, they don't need physical. So it becomes, Of course, they still have to keep a modicum of order, and that's where the adult has to work with the child. That's next week's talk. But this need for order, if something does need to change in their environment, Montessori said, have the child there. And again, I've heard so many parents tell me, when their child was taking a nap, they rearranged the living room furniture, or they changed the child's bedroom when the child wasn't there. And then the child has this incredible tantrum, and the adult has no idea why. They were just coming to know and depend on that goes there, that goes with that, and all of a sudden everything's changed. And they don't have the power of reason. They don't know why. So if we're going to do it, the mom or the dad holds the child while the other adult says, look, we've decided your bed would be better over here because there's a draft, and we explain it. Now your bed's going to go here. In a Montessori classroom, every Montessori teacher has had this experience. The child comes in. I've had many children on their visit day, so they're there for 15 minutes. They walk through the room, they see everything. Over the weekend, we're perfecting our environment. And, I think I want to put that plant over here. The child comes in and sees the plant, picks it up, and puts it right back where it was on their visit day. And you think, they're right, I can't, But then we can say, when we do make a change, what the Montessori approach is we greet the child at the door and we say, I made some changes in the room today, especially with that shelf. Go see, and then tell me if you'd like me to, talk to you about it. So we just make them aware of it. So incredibly important need for order. We eat breakfast at the breakfast table, not on top of the dryer, not in the car, not in the, they need that same structure. It's so important for them. Sensory perception, it's what puts us in touch with the world. She believed, like Aristotle, nothing exists in the mind that wasn't first in our senses. They want to touch everything. There's that whole oral exploration. Once they can touch and move things, it goes in the mouth. And Montessori said they're showing us they want to be one with the environment. This is where they're going to be living the rest of their life, is on this planet. They want to be one with it. So we encourage all of that sensory perception. We play games where we listen. We make ourselves very still, and then we listen to sounds in the environment. The young child loves that. It's called the silence game, stilling our bodies. And then I heard the door close, I heard the fish tank, I heard the tick of the clock. They get so excited identifying the different aspects of their senses. And then finally, social graces is the shortest sensitive period. It comes on about 4.5. Lasts about 6 months, and it's a little window into that second plane of development when the child becomes social, when now they want to be in a wider social environment. This is when experimental language, is what Dr. Montessori called it, comes on. And she said it's very important for the adult not to say to the child, you're lying. But this is when the child will start creating tall tales, things that the adult is just very surprised about. Not imaginative tales, they don't have the power of creative imagination, but they'll make these tall tales. They'll say that their mom is pregnant, or they'll say that their dad got on a plane and flew to the North Pole and he's not coming back, and the tale will, go on and on. Montessori said when we see this, we should identify it as, this is that period of experimental language. They've absorbed enough now. They see mom and dad, when somebody's telling a story, mom and dad get really interested. They listen to the whole thing. They want that same respect. So she said we should just enter into it and say, really, what type of plane did he get on? What color was it? Do you know how he got to the airport? He must have brought a lot of clothes if he's going to the North Pole for a long time. Did you see his suitcase? We just enter in, and then couple of minutes into it, okay, I'm done now, and they go and they play. It's also the period if they've heard potty language. Little boys love to experiment with potty language, especially if they've gotten a big reaction from the adult. So in a Montessori classroom, we say, I understand you've learned a new word. Come with me. And we go into the bathroom and we say, that's a word about things in the bathroom. So you are welcome to stand here and say that word as long as you want in the bathroom. But we don't tend to use that language in the different, in public or whatever. And it passes very quickly. We don't get all wigged out about it, So the the adult is constantly observing the child to adapt the environment to the child's needs. Once they can walk and stand well, every parent in this room knows they want to be up at that kitchen counter doing what you're doing. They get the dining room chair. You can buy a learning tower if you want. You don't really need to. That's what dining room kitchen chairs are for. Push it over, put that beach towel underneath the chair, and let them work at the sink. Let them participate in the work that you're doing. There's always something they can do for any mealtime. You know, pulling grapes off of a stem. We have all these little slicers. As you go through these environments, you'll see what they use for food preparation. They can slice cheese. They can peel carrots. They can just keep you company. You know, even I remember my friend who has a lot of children. They were baking the father a cake, and the 2-year-old wanted to be up with all the teenagers baking a cake. And because her children have been raised this way, the 14-year-old boy said, "Oh, we need you to hold the spoon." And the 2.5-year-old so happy. You know, it meant she was part of the group. She wasn't being excluded. She wasn't being told, you go play, we're going to do the real work. There's always something they can do. So another practice is to walk through every room in your house when your child is asleep and to ask yourself, what am I doing for my child in this room that my child really could be doing for themselves? I remember sharing that with a mom, and she came back the next week and said, I can't believe it. For months now, I have been yelling at my daughter not to climb up onto the counter to get cereal bowls. She said, it never once occurred to me to put the cereal bowls down in a cabinet where she could reach them. You know, we just, like, you know, last week we heard Montessori said, in their dealings with children, the adult is egocentric. It's not so much that we're egotistical, it's we think of everything from our perspective. We put dishes where we want them. Well, now we have a person who's this big in our house. We need to make things welcoming for them. Look at what the Americans with Disabilities Act has done for our society. People in wheelchairs can now participate in so many other things. Why haven't we done that for children? There's not a countertop, there's not a doorknob, there's not a toilet that welcomes their size. There should be, you know. Everybody's going to have children, I hope, you know, and hopefully several of them. It's very easy to put in a child-sized toilet. It's $150. I had a great experience several years ago in Disney World. They had just, in the bathrooms, put in toddler-sized toilets and toddler-sized sinks. And as I was in there, I heard one mother say to this other mother, I can't stand these sinks. I am so angry with these sinks. And the other mother said, why? And she said, because every time my child sees a bathroom sign, she wants to come in and stand there and wash her hands all day long. She just wants to stand there and wash her hands. And I wanted to come out and say, that's really all she wants to do. She doesn't want to be at Disney World. She really doesn't. She's 3. She doesn't want to be dragged around, you know, the overstimulation. She just wanted to wash her hands over and over at a sink that was her size. When we do our visit days in these environments, I can't tell you the number of children. When they see that toilet, they go, oh, for me? You know, there's a toilet I don't have to worry about falling into. You've thought about me. You've prepared something for me. So the elements of the prepared environment, I'm going to do the last, that we're going to go from number 6 to number 1. The elements of a prepared environment in a Montessori classroom, and also much of this is for the home. She identified 6 characteristics. The last characteristic is social cohesion. People working together in the same space in harmony. The 5th element of the prepared environment are the materials. What we think of as the Montessori materials, the sandpaper letters over here, the cylinder blocks, the red rods in the atrium, the nativity set, the model altar, the Enunciation, the prayer table. In your home, whatever manipulatives you're offering to your child, those are the materials. Number 4, structure, beauty and nature. I'm forgetting number 4. Let me look back at my notes. Oh. Beauty Montessori identified that the young child is naturally drawn toward beauty. We don't need to give them a purple dinosaur or a big bird, or they really do appreciate beautiful paintings. She said to the youngest child, we give the greatest beauty. So in giving them religious art, we should be giving them the masters, not cartoon figures of Jesus where he looks like Cro-Magnon man with one eye going up and one. I mean, when I flip through some children's Bibles, which we don't use anyway, and we really recommend no adult introduces a child to a children's Bible, the artwork is usually horrific. And they're drawn like they weren't real people. Jesus is real, and Mary is real, and Joseph is real. We want to be giving them the real, the most beautiful images when those images are becoming part of themselves. So beauty. Beauty also, for Montessori, implied simplicity. It doesn't mean a lot of everything. You know, simple things that are beautiful. You'll see a child when they go to do flower arranging, and there are, you know, maybe 8 or 10 little vases. So many children have their favorite little vase, you know, this beautiful little hand-painted, or the pitcher at hand washing might call to them to work with that activity. The third elements are reality and nature. Like last week, we talked pretty much at length about the absorbent mind being a reality-based mind, that the child cannot understand fantasy until the age of 6 and a half. It's very confusing to them. One of the, I think, hindrances of introducing fantasy to the young child is some children start preferring fantasy over reality. And that's I find it a scary thing. You know, I have taught a few 4.5-year-olds who really didn't want to engage in reality anymore. I see another teacher shaking her head. And it's a sad thing. You know, they've lost their wonder at a plant growing, at a seed sprouting, at bees buzzing around a flower in the spring. They've lost that. Everything becomes something else. I remember one child working with them trying to do the United States puzzle map, could not ever get the child to not pick up a piece of puzzle and say, this is, and it was a character from one of the Disney movies, you know. No, this represents the state of Missouri. No, this is, you know, everything in the environment became something else. Nothing was what it was for. And, you know, the people who are really knowledgeable about this, the art professors at Harvard and Yale, and say the most creative people are those who were steeped in reality until their mind could understand fantasy and reality. You know, then they become incredibly creative. But when you think about it, those Disney movies or those fantasy books, that's an adult's imagination. An adult came up with that. We're taking their imagination and putting it into an immature mind, a 2.5 or a 3-year-old. They have no experience with that. They don't know what to do with it. They sit, you know, in front of it and they stare at it, and that's why a lot of adults use it, because then they get to get other things done. It definitely gets their attention. But we know from the way the brain-mind works, no screen time at all is what's best for the brain until the age of 7 or 8. If you do have to use screen time, don't use fantasy. It really is, it's very harmful to their supernatural life, which we look at in the 4th week. But reality and nature, everything in this environment is real. I know some of you have heard this story before, but it really struck me. A little boy I was welcoming into a classroom years ago refused to come in for his tour. Didn't want to come in. So I gave the mother the tour and named many things in the environment. And at the end, the mother went back to the child and said, "Do you have any questions for Miss Maggie?" And he walked into the middle of the room and he pointed at the iron and he said, "That doesn't get hot, does it?" And I said, "It does get hot, or it wouldn't get the wrinkles out of our cloths." And then he just stopped and he looked around the whole room and he said, "What else in here is real?" I said, "Everything in here is real. The glass breaks, the needles are sharp, everything in here is real." And he threw his arms around his mother and just hugged her. And he came in so hungering to work every single day. You know, I think he'd been surrounded by plastic and being told scissors are dangerous. And, you know, we show them how to use these things. If they're not ready to have them out on a shelf all the time, okay. But rather than protecting them from them, we show them how. It takes 5 minutes. So reality and nature. We have as many, you know, types of plants and animals. We're still building our animal world in this school. But Montessori thought we should have one in a Montessori classroom, one of every phyla of animal, from ants all the way up to horses. So that she said the child needs, you know, the best development for the supernatural is the natural. The child needs to see the progression in nature so that they can extrapolate to the progression in supernature, in what's going on in the supernatural realm. So, and then they see the relationship between, you know, when a fish dies and they have a little funeral for the fish, it's very different from when the dog dies. You know, we have a different level of relationships with different animals. And hopefully I'll talk to Danny about getting a horse in one of these environments. The second one is structure and order. There is a set structure to the day, and the environment is orderly. Every day when they come in, the same thing happens. The directress greets them at the door. How are you? What would you like to choose? And for 3 hours, they go about their work. We don't change our schedule like, you know, the rest of the school does at St. Jerome's from 6 on, because now they're in a different phase of development. They love the different parties, and even at Christmas time, we don't decorate our rooms. That's great for home. We said it again this year, the best day of the whole year is when the children come back from Christmas break. That day, you could hear a pin drop in any room. It has been so chaotic with people visiting, with, you know, this and that, decorations, everything's been disrupted. They come back to this room and it's exactly, everything is where they knew it was. They're so excited to get back to that work. So structure and order. The first one, the most important, she said, the most important element in the child's environment is freedom. Is the adult granting the appropriate freedom to the child. She said, we are Catholic. Freedom always means freedom within limits. My freedom ends where another person's freedom begins. So you are free to walk around this room all day long, looking at things, watching other people work. You are not free to interrupt someone working. And we don't use those words with the young child. It's always positive. We're showing them how. So when we give lessons of grace and courtesy, we gather a group of 3 or 4 children and we say, let me show you how to help a friend continue working. And then we do a role play and we get a 5 or a 6-year-old to do it with us. They love to be the actor. And we model walking past a table where someone's working. And we come back to the group and we say, did you see what I did? Did I bump their table? Did I talk to them? No. I noticed they were working and I wanted to help them go on working. So I walked past the table. Who wants to take a turn? Oh, do they love? You know, they want to all practice, and we show them how to walk in the environment. This is how we walk inside, and we model, and then they practice. If a child forgets and they run in the environment, walk. You know, rather than saying don't run, because what's the last word they hear is run. We want imprinted on their brain what people do inside of buildings, walk, walk. If the child refuses to walk, I'm going to stop your body. It is not safe to run inside. People do not run inside of buildings. And then we find a corner and we ask them to feel the sharp corners. Outside at the park, we don't have sharp corners. There's grass if we fall. It's safe to run outside. Running is a good thing. So we're always trying to, you know, tell the child what they were doing. Throwing is a great thing. We don't throw a glass. You know, we throw balls. So, you know, if that happens, this is not for throwing. Throwing is a good thing. We can throw balls when we go to the park. So these are the elements of the prepared environment. Freedom is what we're going to explore next week with the development of the will, the elimination of punishments and rewards and verbal praise. So we'll be going into that next week. We're just coming up on an hour, so I'm going to stop so that we have about 10 minutes for questions. Yes?
Two questions. The first is about language, but I suppose it's a broader question as well. Can you say a bit about the role of correction in the first stage of development? Let's say starting with a child who's 2 or 3, and I'll give a very specific example. So our son has had a habit for a long time. When he asks a question, he punctuates it with the word because. And so I have periodically said, you don't need to say because when you ask a question. He'll then repeat the question without the word because, but then the next time he asks a question, of course, it's punctuated with because again. So on the one hand, I want him to learn how to say it, how to ask questions correctly. On the other hand, I don't want him to become sort of paranoid about his language. So that's one question. Just going back to the reality in nature and fantasy, this is, my wife and I have had somewhat of a debate about this topic. And so I was wondering, one, if you could define what you mean when you say fantasy in the context of books, of games, of this kind of thing. And then secondly, what's the best argument you've heard for fantasy? And how do you respond to that?
Okay.
At the first stage of development.
That is a great question. I have never heard, honestly, I've never heard a good argument for fantasy. Never. I haven't. I mean, I've heard people who have engaged in Waldorf education that they say it aids the child's creativity, but studies have shown that it doesn't. I mean, that's a proven thing. Because what is our imagination? There is a fabulous chapter Dr. Montessori wrote in the Advanced Montessori Method 1, I think it's 45 pages long, on imagination. Where does imagination come from? The ancients knew this. It is from taking in reality. It's the ability to take qualities from reality, to take color, to take shape, to take form, sound, and create something new, like a hobbit, right? He knew feet, he knew hair, he knew, he took those elements and created something new. Star Wars, all of those things are based on reality, but it's creating something that doesn't exist. So I'll give you an example that was big, many years when I was teaching, when The Little Mermaid came out. Many parents came to me and said, my child won't sleep through the night anymore because of Ursula. She comes up out of the ocean. I mean, that's a terrifying scene. I'm an adult, and I thought that was scary. Disney is for adults. It is. And the 8-year-old gets a big kick out of it. Then the adult tries to say, but honey, she isn't real. But the child saw it. They don't know that some things that they see are real and some things are the figment of an adult's imagination. They don't know that yet. At 7, 6 and a half, 7, you can explain that to them. And I've had many parents have told me they sat down and told them how animation happens, and they were fascinated by it. That means nothing to a 2.5 or a 3-year-old. Nothing. What they see is real. They absorb. They don't have that part of the absorbent mind is it's a non-judgmental mind. If the parent continually says to the child, you're bad, stop that, you're bad, they're bad. They absorb, they are bad. They aren't bad, but that's the reality they're living. So anything that we're introducing, books that show animals that talk or wear clothes or, again, many adults have shared with me, I won't go into that they still have to struggle with, does an animal have the capacity of reason or not? Because they were fed so much misinformation about animals in this stage of life. It is hilarious to think of a hippopotamus with a tutu dancing ballet. That's hilarious because we know what a hippopotamus is. They don't really know what a hippo is yet. Let's give them, and they're hungering for it. That's the beautiful thing that Montessori said is the human person is born in love with the world. They are fascinated. Look at the young child. When we're trying to walk down to the park, how hard is it for us to get there? Because they find a million things on the sidewalk before we get there. And we've got a group of them, and you're wanting that one to explore. But Everything is fascinating to them. I remember a few months ago, this bush out here was blooming. Every time we went out, there was one particular boy, there's another flower that wasn't here yesterday. He was so excited. That's natural to them. They don't need fantasy. G.K. Chesterton said, the young child has no need of fantasy because life itself holds enough romance. Reality itself holds enough romance. Then when they've got the capacity, great. That's when we feed. That's when we give all those stories. But you really see it in the supernatural development of the child. There's that whole struggle with mom and dad have told me this is real, and they've told me this is real. Well, now I've found out this isn't real. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, and why would I believe them about it? And it's a confusion that doesn't need to be there. It's not a need, so that. Right away when you were saying that, I was thinking of a mom that shared with me her little 2.5-year-old. They were in the kitchen, and he was counting. It was summertime. Everybody had their shoes off, and he was counting everybody's toes. And he was 1, 2, 8, 10, 9, and they're laughing. And then the other sibling would take. And then the dad came in and said, no, honey, let me show you. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the child sat back and said, I don't want to play anymore, Daddy. They're going to learn how to count to 10. Why take the joy out of it? Just let them explore. One of Montessori's most repeated phrases was, we teach teaching, not correcting. So just keep modeling how to ask a question, rather than, I think I would let it go, but I don't know your child. Some children are more sensitive than others, but there's a time he'll pass through it.
Yes.
So what about enunciation? So do you think just letting it go without saying, hey, this is the way you pronounce the word, you don't pronounce it this way?
No, he knows. He's heard many people. I mean, if it's like a new word that, actually I just had that experience with your son. He thought I was saying something with an M, but it was an N. And so I said, those sound alike, don't they? That's very similar. You got it. So something like that. But if it's a word they keep saying incorrectly, I wouldn't worry about it. They pass through it. And that's the beauty of this environment. Children are talking all day long. That's not the adult. They hear it over and over and over. And I wait for them to ask. And then we model that it's beautiful to, ask your wife. Your wife asks you, because your wife speaks another language. You could ask, it would be great for her to ask you, is this how you pronounce that in English? To show him we're all still learning. We adults haven't arrived. We don't know everything. We're learning every day.
We have a 1 and 6 months child. Is it good talking about the weather, is it good to take him on long periods of vacation, take him out of the environment maybe for a week or two? Say to a different country to the beach?
Sure. I would just know that anytime you interrupt their schedule, it's not going to, just know what you're getting in for. They probably won't sleep when they get to the hotel. Their toilet training will be off when you get back. Anything that disrupts their order, just expect it. It doesn't mean you don't travel, but you just know this is going to be a little hard for them. But of course they'll live through it, Yes.
Yeah, so we have a 17-month-old, and every time that he throws a ball, he's playing, and that's fine. But then he does the same thing with other items like food and books, and then he throws it, and I say, no, we don't throw the book, and then he does it more. So he's defying me. He looks at me, and now he does it, and you see what I do. And I've been looking at what I should do, and they said,
Yeah, he's looking for the limit. He wants to know, really? You take the book away. We do not throw books, and the book is taken away. You may throw a ball. He goes to do it again. I mean, in the classroom, if they throw, even in the toddler room, if they throw food on the floor, when food goes on the floor, that says the meal is over. Food does not go on the floor. Is that, in the beginning, want to give them the knowledge. You know, we always ask ourselves, is this lack of knowledge or lack of will? We're going to assume it's lack of knowledge. So food doesn't go on the floor. They start to do it again. Food does not go on the floor. You're showing me the meal is over. And the plate doesn't go back down. I want the food. You can try again next time, but food doesn't go on the floor. And then we go on with our day. They don't get punished, but the limit is very clear. Balls are what get thrown. Other things don't get thrown. But if we don't follow through, it's like, you know, she said they're pushing, trying to find that sheepfold. They're trying to find where the limit is. And if it's not clear, they want that solid brick wall. You know, Montessori talked about, she said, if parents could picture their child as a raging river trying to get to the ocean, right? That's the purpose of a river, is to empty out at the ocean. And what does that river need to get to the ocean but two very firm banks, the mother and the father? And the banks need to be the same in communication with one another. If the banks are too rigid, too strict, there's going to be a flood. There's going to be an explosion. If the banks are too weak, if they're not strong enough, the river's going to go off into these tributaries and these little creeks and might get to the ocean, might not. You know, that's why the mother and the father are in constant communication about, you know, do we allow jumping on the couch or don't we? Do we allow, you know, and if they're already in the habit of, well, I'm going to go ask dad or I'm going to go ask mom, that's got to get stopped. The mother and the father have to be on the same page for their order. You know, they want that. So we just take that object away. We don't keep saying no, no, no. You know, we want to say throwing is a good thing. This is what you may throw. And maybe this is where you may throw it, you know, depending on your house. Yeah.
So I have two children. One is 2.5 and the other is 10 months. And I was thinking about, you know, setting up your home so you only have 3 toys, which was our sort of ideal that we had just been getting to when we had the second child. And we're now finding that they sort of play with different toys or they play with them differently. And now there's way more toys than we would like that are out. And so I just wondered if you had advice for having children of different ages and different needs.
You know, if you have a place where that toddler can be, the 10-month-old can work like a baby gate at their door or wherever for a while without the 2.5-year-old, that's ideal, because typically what happens, a family was just telling me this, their 3-year-old is getting so angry because the 11-month-old is constantly interrupting their work. Well, that's not fair, and we don't want that to be modeled. He is working with the whatever. Let's find something for you. And they need some time apart to work apart. It's not fair that the older child is always expected to turn over their work. There are times we play together, there are times we play separately. Then we take the baby in with us or a separate, you know, space. You know, that's going to be an ongoing thing until they go to college. Be asking all these other moms what they did when they were 6 and 7. Actually, that's easier. Any other questions?
Yes. So I'm trying to play with cubes and show him to put one on top of the other. And he likes to see me do that, but then he comes and he likes to push it.
Sure.
But it's like, yeah?
Oh, yeah, that's what building blocks, I mean, yeah. How fun is that? You build, you knock it. You know, St. Thomas Aquinas said we learn through composition and division. You know, knock it down, do it again. Knock it down, do it again. You know, and we don't expect, even in this environment where the child is 2.5 or 3, I'm looking for the pink tower. There's a tower of 10 cubes and they differ 1 centimeter each cube. It's to help them distinguish 3-dimensional differences. When we present that to the 2.5 or 3-year-old, we fully expect that they will not build it properly. If they do it perfectly the first time, then the director says, oh, I've missed the boat. Because they no longer need that. If they're doing it perfectly, you know, it's the looking at it and figuring it out, and then finally, time after time after time, then they do it. They do this, the dance of the pink tower. They get so excited that they did it themselves, and they dance around, and you know, we don't say anything about it. Not a word. We don't say good job. We just, how beautiful that I got to see, you know, the child do that. If they come and get us and say, look, you know, then we would say, you did it. You kept practicing over and over. I've seen you take out the pink tower so many times. You have built it. I knew you could do it. And then we leave them alone.
And then another question, we are bilingual, so we speak English and Spanish. My mother tongue is Spanish, so we're speaking Spanish all the time, and then our nanny speaks Portuguese, so we're speaking 3 languages.
Wow.
Is that good or?
That's fabulous. That will develop parts of the brain that would not have gotten developed. The more languages in the child's environment consistently with the same people, learning other languages later in life will be so much easier for them. Each language has its own decibel range. It's really fascinating. And by 9 months, the human vocal cords start atrophying. So they will never again be able to repeat those sounds if they were not in their environment in the first 9 months of life. We can learn a language and we can speak it, but it will never be like a native, because the human body becomes very efficient. These are the only language I'm hearing, so these are the only vocal cords I need. So by having 3 different languages, their capacity now is there for life, and makes it much easier. And they tend to speak fluently a little bit later, but that's, Okay, I think if there are no more questions, thank you for coming, and then hopefully we'll see you next Saturday.